righty, well, Jessica Cifuentes, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Mariano, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course, it's a pleasure. If you wouldn't mind beginning by introducing yourself and your background and what kind of work you've been up to recently.
Absolutely. So my name is Jessica Emily Cifuentes, and I am the newest OKCPS school board member elect. I represent District 3. And just a little bit about me. I was actually born in Fullerton, California, but when I was a baby, my family decided to move to Oklahoma City. And so at 5 months old, we moved here to Oklahoma City, and I grew up here ever since. So raised here in our awesome state of Oklahoma. Thankfully, I've enjoyed it so far. You know, it's kind of a small, big town is what people like to call Oklahoma City. Went to public schools myself. Went to James Buchanan Elementary. It's a school that's in my district right now that I get to serve. It's such an exciting thing to go back as an alum, and just seeing the kids there, it's been incredible. From there, I had a pretty remarkable journey. James Buchanan really prepared me for what was next, which was I went to a school that was authorized by OKCPS named Aztec Charter Middle School and High School. There, I mean, I did so many things. I was very involved with extracurriculars. I did extracurriculars, co-curriculars. I mean, all the leadership, volunteer things you could think of. Like, all of the opportunities that I had there, I truly drew from, and I think has really helped shape to be who I am today. And those opportunities at Aztec, I take them with me every day. I think about, I was that student in an OKCPS or OKCPS authorized school not too long ago, and I kind of bring that with me. And then from Aztec Charter, I decided to go to a university in Atlanta, Georgia called Emory University. I was a Questbridge Scholar, and I decided to study material science engineering, and I also did all of my pre-med requirements there. It was quite the experience. Atlanta is actually a really big town, but Emory was such a great, holistic environment, very educational. Everybody there is very academically inclined. They do a lot of research in the world. They were the university that discovered the medication for AIDS and HIV, and they do just such great work, and helped me to kind of continue to keep dreaming pretty big. I graduated in May of 2020, not the best year to graduate. Still have dreams of becoming a physician one day, but since graduating from Emory, I've had a pretty remarkable journey. I got to work as a registered behavioral technician with kids that have autism. I also worked as a math instructor for math up to pre-calculus, and I've held a few jobs here and there as much as I could while still keeping the dream alive of wanting to go to med school one day. And then, in the year of 2022, the very end, I told myself I wanted to do 2023 with a huge bang. But I did not realize how much of a bang, Mariano. My trajectory has been quite fun, and interesting, I didn't think that the opportunity to run for office one day was gonna present itself. I've thought about it before. I was very involved in high school and got to go to the state capitol. I did a program called Oklahoma Close-Up. We're trying to bring it back, by the way. Nice. It's a week-long program. Students from all across the state go, and they shadow state legislators, learn about Oklahoma government, all of the hot social issues affecting us, and we do mock legislators, and it was just such a great opportunity. And I kind of left that dream of running for office back in high school. I didn't think about it until 2023. And so 2023 came. I got to shadow a general and robotic surgeon at Norman Regional Hospital. His name is Dr. Daniel Isbell, for 3 weeks. I think about that opportunity almost daily. And that's, I think, what really inspired me to go pretty hard in academics and just everything that I do in life. And so I was doing that. I did a surgical technology program, got into the surgical technology program at Metro Tech. And all of a sudden, there was one weekend in August where I think the trajectory really changed just a little bit. And I got crowned as Reina Cultural Guatemala. And so it was a remarkable weekend, Mariano, I'm gonna tell you that. I finished my previous job. They wouldn't accept part-time people, and so I finished my job to the very last day. It was the first Friday of August. Saturday, I got crowned Reina Cultura Guatemala by Senator Michael Brooks Jimenez, and Representative Alonzo was there. It was my first time ever meeting him. And then that Monday, I started my surgical technology program. And, this whole experience, I was going to school. I was being very involved with my culture and Hispanic heritage, and Hispanic Heritage Month was coming up. And so I was getting invited to many places, and at these places, I started to have really meaningful conversations with Senator Brooks Jimenez and Representative Alonzo. I was looking for a job, and I wanted to shout out Michael Brooks Jimenez's law firm here. This is where we are today. Thank you for letting us use this space and have this podcast. But yes, and he offered me a job to work here at his law firm. And at the same time, one day, Representative Alonzo said, "When are you going to run for office?" And I hadn't thought about that in years, Mariano. But the opportunity was, I saw that there was a need in our schools. I saw that the majority of our students in OKCPS are Hispanic or Latino. Quite a bit of them speak Spanish, come from Spanish-speaking homes. I absolutely thought to myself, this needs to happen. We need the representation. We just need so much going on. So there's so much going on here in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma City Public Schools. And a lot of the problems that we have federally stem from our local schools. When you fix the schools, you fix so many things. And so I decided to run for office and ran for OKCPS Public Schools District 3. And, it was such an invigorating experience. And then, we could talk a little bit about this later, but, one of the biggest challenges was I was up against an incumbent. And, I was 25 years old at the time, now I'm 26. Being young, I had an incumbent. It's almost near impossible to beat somebody that already has the seat. It's difficult. And so I knew what was ahead of me. But honestly, I tried as hard as I could, and we were able to win the election on April 2nd. And so now I am the standing OKCPS school board member.
Very nice. Good encapsulation of your background here. But what, if you were to introduce what the school board does to somebody who's not familiar, what is their job?
Yes. So Oklahoma City Public Schools, it's one of the biggest districts in the nation. And so, I got to meet quite a few different school boards and members when I did my new board member training recently, a couple weeks ago. And so Oklahoma City Public Schools, we're a little bit unique in that we have 8 board members. And so the second largest in Oklahoma is 7 members, which is Tulsa. But our district is large enough that we have a chair. So that's our 8th member. So there are 7 members that have individual districts, and then there's an at-large district-wide chairperson that represents all of them. Everybody votes for that person. And so this 8-member board, we are responsible for a few things. So the biggest one is we vote on where all the funding and where all the finances go to in Oklahoma City Public Schools. We also are in charge of hiring and just in charge of a superintendent that has a 6-figure income salary. The superintendent, they're in charge of the cabinet members. Cabinet members are in charge of people who are the bosses of the principals, and then those are the bosses of the teachers. And so, we have different departments and different cabinet members, but, going up to the very top, the superintendent is their boss, and we're kind of like the boss of the superintendent. And then the other thing that I've been getting more into and kind of having to learn also on the go is we are in charge of contracts. So all the services that we need in Oklahoma City Public Schools, whether it's like building, constructing a new building, constructing a new school, if we have to hire somebody for some service, those contracts, we are the ones who vote on who does those contracts. And so I know right now we have a project going on for a new elementary school, and they literally just call it the new elementary school. But it's actually a public bidding process. And so on our website, okcps.org, you can actually see all the projects that we have, and if people want to bid, you can, and then we eventually are going to vote as a board as to who gets to do that contract. So yeah, so that's kind of what we do. And also part of just being a political figure, I mean, you get voted in, and so it's always just being there for the community. We are the eyes and ears of our districts for the chair, and then the chair is the one who decides what gets put on the agenda for us to vote on. And so I think so far I've been loving that job in particular, just being able to listen to what's going on in the schools, and maybe listen to parents, listen to people in the community, and maybe what's going on at the state capitol, and kind of just being that bridge between the community and other figures in the space. So
sure,
yeah.
So beyond these administrative tasks that you've been describing, do you have any concrete goals for the near future that you want to work on?
Absolutely. I have quite a few. And so I'm still working on the dynamics of it, but I know one thing that has been just near and dear to my heart is we need more bilingual schools. And I think now that we have 2 board members, this is the first time we've ever had 2 board members at the same time that are Hispanic or Latino. I think we can work on that. And our new superintendent that we recently hired, she has also expressed that she wants to also increase the amount of bilingual schools that we have available. I think that's going to be a really big just an asset that we can have in our community. Our students already have the talent, and I think to be able to nurture that talent and have a beautiful space, maybe hire the staff that maybe have the heritage or know the language or both, I think that is going to take our district really far, and something that I've always been a huge proponent of as well. Colleges look for multilingual people, employers do. If you're in the military, it's another strong talent and asset to have wherever you go into the world. And I think to be able to have a community here in Oklahoma City that is so strong and so just talented and multilingual, it's gonna take us really far, and so we could have people that are prepared for the workforce and preparing for the future. And so that's one of my biggest goals. The other thing is, I didn't realize how stark the differences are between schools in Oklahoma City public schools. Some schools have more newer buildings, some have really old, maybe historical buildings, and then it's the same with funding and kind of like extracurriculars. And so I've really enjoyed particularly just learning on the field. What better way than to go out and do something, go out to the state capitol, learn about the government, go out and maybe participate in a sport, and doing all these kinds of activities. I would love to increase just all of these opportunities for our students. I think my high school education, most of my time was by a school authorized by OKCPS. It was a really cool blend of in the classroom experience, but also outside of the classroom experience, that I think it really made me just be so holistic and well-rounded in everything that I do. And so I think that is such an important aspect of the schools. We need to give our students reasons to want to be there, want to learn. I personally have loved always learning. I still try to learn every day as much as I can. And so I think having more extracurricular, co-curricular, leadership, volunteer, scholarship opportunities, as much as I can, trying to spread those resources more out throughout all the district, the entire district. I think that is something that I really would love to do and try to propel forward. And then I did want to mention one thing too with our new superintendent. She is great. We can talk about her too a little bit. But she she personally, so her name is Dr. Jamie Polk. And, we went through a very extensive hiring process. And we chose her. She is currently serving as the assistant superintendent of elementary education. She has gotten several of her schools off of the F list. And so, yes, we are excited to have her as this new role and potentially do that throughout the district. And so I think something that I really loved about her was how data driven she was. She was showing us data that I haven't seen personally about my district, my schools. And she showed it to all of us. And people know her as somebody who is data driven. And as an engineer, I'm like, oh, I love this. Like, I'm getting butterflies just talking about her and thinking about it. But, you know, that is the way to measure success. You have to have the data. And so I would, in combination with working with Dr. Polk, I mean, I would love to get more of our schools off of the F list. And that comes with having somebody that knows what the criteria is for the grading scale of our schools. And I think, you know, that would honestly brighten up Oklahoma City so much.
Sure. That's wonderful stuff. I do want to go back to some of the stuff you mentioned earlier about emphasizing bilingual schools.
Yes.
As I understand it, the state has recently changed its requirements for high schoolers to graduate, where in the future they won't need.
Yes, actually, I just saw that. As well. It's interesting. I don't know why the state Board of Education does that. You know, and of course we all have mixed feelings because I mean it's a talent. You know, different universities you can get scholarships if you're multilingual. I mean, like when I went to Emory, I frequently encountered people that spoke 2 to 5, 6 languages like daily. Like this was a normal thing. And those are the type of people that go to places like Emory. And you know, and so the people would ask me like, oh, what languages do you speak? I'm like, well, English and Spanish, you know, but I never formally learned Spanish. And so my Spanish is a little bit broken. I try as best as I can and I'm still learning, you know. But I could only imagine what it would have done to me if I had a bilingual school that taught me proper Spanish and, you know, as a public school kid. I could only imagine what that would do. And so to have students that have proper training in another language, I mean, we're going to become more competitive as a city and as a state. Who wouldn't want that? And so for the State Board of Education to say that this is no longer a requirement, it's pretty sad. It is pretty sad, I think. I think this is, we're going backwards at this point. And then it's also kind of implying that, oh, like we have a big district here, OKCPS, that has a lot of students that are already speaking the language. It's almost saying you don't matter. It doesn't matter, you know, like and so, you know, I can, like those students that already speak Spanish, I don't know how they're going to feel, but what's awesome about it is that's the bare minimum, right? So in OKCPS, I mean, we could implement our own policies that, hey, our students do have to learn a language, or or they do have to meet a certain criteria in order to graduate. So, you know, it's going to be interesting, and I will bring up that question too to my board and ask, like, hey, so I know this is what the state is doing, but what are we going to do? You know, are we going to follow that? I don't think we should, knowing that we already have the talent, you know?
Yeah, no, and that would be an interesting thing to follow up with. But that idea that the state government in Oklahoma does things that are just contrary to the benefit of the students,
absolutely,
benefit of teachers, that tends to be a persistent theme over the years. I mean, you're new to the board, but I mean, I'm sure you've already encountered examples of that, and will continue to find examples of that. So, I mean, what is your mentality in terms of addressing those sorts of conflicts where the state government acts against the interests of students?
Some of those people are definitely putting politics before people. It's a political gain movement. It's very sad because they're at the very top. Maybe they don't really interact with students on the daily, you know, and it's interesting because you if you go to the top, maybe you talk about elected officials, superintendents, just people who are in power and maybe are getting paid. School board members do not really get paid, by the way. But when you talk about those people, it's also interesting to think about what was their experience with kids. Do they have any experience with kids? With students, with the future of Oklahoma City? Why do they make these decisions? And so, yeah, that disconnect, I mean, it happens. I think it happens because we're in such a red state. You know, the Republicans are dominant at the state capitol, voting wise, and so it's kind of a straight party ballot thinking, right? And so doing what they think is best. And then there's also the conversation about including religion on this, you know, and personally for me, the classroom is a place to learn. And so, and regardless, in Oklahoma City Public Schools, we do not care what you practice. We don't care what religion you are. We are accepting of all students, and all students are able to learn. This is Oklahoma City Public Schools, you know? And so to see that our state politics, I mean, they might impact us. And so I know that on the board, we are constantly watching and being aware of what is happening at the state level, and they'll give us updates every week. They'll talk about maybe like House Bill 4156, for example. And so I know that with the board, we try to work with them as much as possible, but sometimes, I mean, they make decisions and they don't necessarily get all of the input that they should.
Sure. And that raises concerns about the future of our public schools, and this kind of raises the issue of what forms of alternative schoolings might help that problem. You mentioned earlier that you went to a charter school. I also went to a charter school. I went to Dove Science Academy.
Nice.
And our good friend Arturo Alonso, he also went to charter schools. And I know in mine and his case, we were both raised on the south side of Oklahoma City. Our schools are not known for being good schools. So the sort of opportunities we were able to have going to these charter schools, I mean, certainly helped us prepare us for college and beyond and so on. And so, what is the role of the school board with handling different forms of schooling, including charter schools?
I love that question. So, I love that question for a couple reasons. So, there's different forms of schooling, of course. You know, we have private, we have public, we have charter, we have homeschooling. But within public schools, and specifically in Oklahoma City Public Schools, so we have schools that are authorized by OKCPS that are charter schools. We have quite a few, I think it's like 4 or 5 in our district that we have right now. And then we also have kind of a newer thing that's growing, which are our magnet schools, which it's interesting because the charter school situation, and I call it a situation because throughout my campaign, I mean, that's something that I frequently was on fire for, was, oh, she's a charter school lover. And so there have been some premonitions a little bit here and there that, it's unfavorable to charter schools. I mean, they assume that, these schools are taking the best students. They apply to these schools. They are still considered public schools. Anybody can go to them. Anybody can apply to them, but it's just a little premonition that these schools are taking our best students. They're hand-selecting students, taking away from public schools. But when in reality, it should be one thing. We're working towards the same goal. And so I have seen that OKCPS, sometimes what they do is sometimes they'll include the charter school kids and sometimes they won't in their numbers. And it depends on what they're asking for. If they're asking for funding, they will include the charter school kids. And then if it's something else, they won't. And so, it's an interesting conversation there. But what I have seen on the board as well is that, we have been pretty proud of our schools that are authorized by OKCPS, our charter schools, because we have some interesting ones. We have the first bilingual one, which is Western Gateway Elementary, which is also in my district. That's one that I'm incredibly proud of. And something that even the charter school leaders have said is charter schools were actually put in place to kind of experiment with a different form of education and kind of specialize maybe in science or technology or whatever it could be. And eventually, after just kind of seeing how these different forms of educating people are, implementing those into the public schools. So that was the original reason why we really had charter schools in the first place. But I think what's been really interesting is that, the charter schools, they've been serving something that's been missing. It's just another option for our families if they want to go there. I had a really good experience. I don't know if you did, but I really loved my experience at Aztec Charter. Now, I also talked a little bit about the magnet schools. So right now we have three, which are, so we have Belle Isle, that is, now they're going to have a high school. I don't know if you knew that, Class and SAS, and Southeast. And so, it's interesting because those are, you have to apply to get in, kind of like a charter school, but they're OKCPS, right? And so it's exciting to have these competitive schools that, hopefully it's going to bring more people to Oklahoma City and just have a high-class education that we all love and we all deserve, right? And so, we have those magnet schools, private schools. We actually have a private school that, so their name is Cristo Rey. They are actually renting a building from OKCPS. And so, it's kind of interesting how we have all these different schools that are related to OKCPS in some way, and kinds of schools. But I think what has also been good to see too, because I'll bring up the charter school question. I wanted to know if our superintendent, what she thought about charter schools when we were interviewing her. And it's kind of a little bit of a battle, like who's gonna do better, which schools are gonna do better. So the charter school people, they are happy to say, like, well, if you really want us out, do better, but now our superintendent, I had a pretty cool conversation with her too. She said, well, let's make OKCPS better than those charter schools. And I'm like, okay, that's a healthy competition that we have right now. But it's all in the same name of, doing what's best for the kids.
Sure.
And so I think being able to kind of just be proud of the fact that we are in a district that has charter schools, magnet schools, buildings that are being rented to private schools. I think it's a really cool combination, and there are some people that are super proud of the fact that we have all of this within the district. We're such a big district, and to have these options and to be able to provide what's best for each family and each student, I think that should be the goal. And some people definitely have that same idea. So
that's wonderful, and I think that's a good thing to emphasize, the positive aspects of charter schools. As you mentioned, there's a lot of misconceptions around charter schools. One thing that people also have a misconception about is that there's some sort of classism, right? That it's only the rich kids that go to charter schools, right? But these are not private schools, right?
Yes.
And as I mentioned in the case of myself and Representative Alonso, I mean, these take children from areas that don't have lots of educational opportunities, that are dealing with lots of socioeconomic issues, and giving them an opportunity to see beyond the struggle that is in their local community and have more access to higher education. And so that, I think, is a perception issue that hopefully will change. And I'm
Absolutely.
glad to hear that you're working on within the board.
Absolutely. I think, I might even be the annoying person that brings it up quite a bit, but no. And to kind of add to that point, so when I went to Western Gateway for the first time, I was in awe, and I asked about their application process. It's interesting, right? And so what they had told me is that they have 3 stages. So the first stage, first round of applicants that they'll accept are those that live within the boundaries that they set, and so they just get first pick, right? And then after that first round, it goes to people who are in OKCPS, so preference for anybody who's in the district. And then after that, it's open to anybody. That's actually a pretty cool process. I mean, it's kind of open to anybody. It just happens to be if you live close there. I mean, you can go there, right? And so I know that, and then different charter schools have different application processes, and of course, not all charter schools are great. There are some that have their problems, absolutely. But to have that option, and also being able to talk to some of my constituents that have kids that go there, I mean, they've expressed to me their concerns, like, well, where are my kids going to go after they outgrow Western Gateway Elementary? What's going to happen next? I don't see a formidable school that is the next step in the district. And, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I ran, was I want to be able to have a bilingual school that they could matriculate into. But it's with those different application processes, and then of course not all charter schools are the same. We have our differences, but there are also some really good pluses, I think.
Wonderful. And so we've talked so far a little bit about the interaction between the state government and the local school board, but increasingly it seems to me there's a trend to take national politics and apply them at these levels, right? And so famously, like, you'll have these videos of people that go to school board meetings who will rant about things that they probably saw on cable news or on social media, things about, you know, the content of books or whatever it may be. And so, I mean, have you had any direct experience with that, with people going in and complaining about things that don't quite seem warranted, but, you know, are very popular in terms of like rage bait, clickbait stuff online or cable news?
So, well, I haven't seen anything on the school board and just any of our regular or special meetings, to be honest. But I've had personal interactions where people are bringing up these topics. Sometimes knocking on the doors is what people care about. They'll ask me about those woke teachers or banning of books. And you know, it's interesting because people do care about those national issues. And they'll ask and they'll vote based off of what you say, right? What you think and how you're going to react. And so I know that with these personal experiences, I've tried my best to continue to be inclusive and kind of also be whatever the OKCPS's like their mission statement and how they're so inclusive with everybody and they welcome everybody and everybody can learn. Anybody can come to OKCPS. I've been trying to have those same values and express those same values when I was knocking on the doors, because it's true. You know, these are our public schools. These are people that are in the public, the general public, that we need to serve as best as we can. And so being able to listen to some of those concerns that are federal, national issues, and then, you know, try to bring those concerns to the board as much as I can. I mean, that would be my role. And so we're working on it. You know, we are working on it as much as we can and trying to also, you know, I'm working for my constituents. I'm working for the people who voted me in, working for the students, you know, and so I think that these national issues, yes, they are pretty important to families, but sometimes we have to figure out how is that really going to impact our schools, you know?
Sure. And that is an interesting and can be a tricky topic of what things are age appropriate, what things have academic value. I mean, in your experience so far, have you had to make any of these sorts of choices of what things do and don't get allowed so far?
Not yet. And I say that because I'm sure it's coming. I do know that the questions have been raised. Like sometimes there are some pretty heavy topics in history, for example, that, you know, parents are concerned if, you know, is this appropriate for my kid to learn about slavery or whatever the deep, dark history is. And so I think we have to also take into consideration, well, you know, it's down to personal preference too, and families and the parents that are involved. You know, we need parent involvement because it's all the adults in the child's life that is helping them to grow and learn and become eventually somebody successful or whatever their dreams are. You know, it's all of our jobs to help the next generation. And so, you know, I think if the parent doesn't want a particular subject, then they need to communicate that to the schools, or they need to tell their kids. You know, it's all about communication and working together with these heavier topics. But, you know, these heavier topics, I mean, they're in the history books. These are things that happened, you know. And so if a student really wanted to learn something about maybe some history that the U.S. has had and beyond, you know, I think it would be about also asking their parents, asking the teachers, asking everybody around, like, hey, I want to learn more. What is to stop them, to be honest?
Sure. And so going beyond the content of what is taught in classrooms, it seems to me another important aspect to consider is how things are taught, right? And the phrase teaching kids how to think rather than what to think is a popular phrase, but I think one thing that I wish were more prevalent would be an embrace of play-based learning, right? Especially at the early childhood levels, right? In our culture, we have this assumption that school should be boring, right? But it's like, but for kids to be engaged, to want to learn, to pique their curiosity, I mean, that is just how you get kids passionate about learning.
Absolutely.
And so I guess I would ask you, what have you thought so far about promoting forms of play-based learning, or are you aware of any concrete plans to involve more of that going forward?
So, I do know, and what I've looked at with our regular meetings, they'll give us an agenda, they'll give us a couple days to look at it, and then we vote on what we're going to vote on. And I know that one of the things that I saw recently was, just the amount of funding that goes through for every program. So it would be like this high school's volleyball team and this high school's some type of leadership team. And so, sometimes they've even told me like, oh, you don't have to look at it so closely. And I'm like, you don't, do you? Are you sure? Because this is directly what you're talking about, right? Is funding for the arts, funding for the sports, right? Which there's never not going to be funding for sports. I mean, people love their sports, which is great. I mean, it's a good thing. It's a good outlet. People can get scholarships through it, so it's wonderful. Funding for maybe STEAM activities or STEM activities. And so seeing that, I do know that, we have like a specific budget for programs at schools. So I am very interested to try and look at those a little bit more closely and bring it up to the board and realizing like, hey, like this is a really good program. We need to invest more in this program, and maybe invest all around, I think is what it could be. Because I really love that question, because it goes back to kind of my love of learning. I mean, it was the fact that I got to do so many things and go on field trips and be in the industry. I mean, I fell in love with engineering because I did engineering camps that were free by local universities. And I fell in love with medicine because I got to do a program at Metro Tech that was, different. I got to leave my high school. And so, what better way to learn than to actually be in the field? I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. And we need more of it. We do. And so when, I go back to the board and being able to talk to them, I know that I like to look at those numbers closely, and I really will try to analyze and see, hey, what else can we do? Because this play-based learning, I mean, it makes people want to go to school. It teaches them different things, different skills sometimes too, that's hard to learn maybe sitting here in a classroom. And so, no, we need to embrace it, and I absolutely will be doing that. Yes.
And I'm very happy to hear that. But one tension that I could see coming up with this is that with these more free-flowing play-based forms of learning, it's harder to quantify progress and so forth. But at the same time, standardized testing, I mean, it's not ideal. It's not an ideal way. It's a very unnatural thing to get kids and force them to sit down for hours at a time and, write on a piece of paper, right? This is not what kids are made to do. Yet at the same time, going back to the point earlier you made about that, schooling decisions should be data-driven, right?
Of course.
There seems to me, there is where I think the tension would be.
Absolutely.
Right, where the more conventional, standardized forms of education are easier to quantify, but they're not ideal to how kids actually learn, how kids actually want to learn, how kids find out what things they're interested in, which might be much harder to quantify, right? So that seems to me that
absolutely no, and that's a great point, with that little tension going on. And then there's also that same tension with our teachers teaching to the test, or are they teaching to actually know how to think, right? You kind of brought that up a little bit as well. And I think the hardest thing is we need a little bit of it all. I know that OKCPS, we've had the criticism that sometimes our students are just being passed, and their reading scores are not being looked at. There are different metrics that we can use, and I mean, they get passed up, and then suddenly we have an 8th grader who's reading at a 4th grade level. And that happens. It does happen. And so I know with those, I mean, sometimes we're not even looking at the metrics. We're not even looking at how our 3rd graders are reading. And so it is hard to quantify, but you can do it through surveys. You can do it through how the students are doing in the classrooms. And so for those experiences that are maybe outside of the classroom, I mean, you have to look at how they are doing in the classroom and then seeing, okay, like we can augment their studies with a program or a free, I don't know, a free camp or whatever it could be. That the students need. And so, yeah, that tension it's an interesting tension, but there are different ways to be able to measure that, you know, and I think even some of our schools have, whenever they're considering their valedictorian, for instance, sometimes they have to consider, well, if they have the exact same grade, are we going to pick just one? Are we going to pick a co-valedictorian? And they'll look at those extracurriculars. What are they doing, you know? What else are they doing beyond just academics? And so it does bring that question. But I know with Dr. Jamie Polk coming in, I know she's going to be able to help quantify that quite a bit and continue on just with our academic success in OKCPS.
Mm-hmm. Another reason I think it's important to look beyond the content of what is taught and more to how things are taught is there does also be a perception that some of the things that are taught in school are insufficient, right? Like people that complain that, you know, we're not taught about how to do taxes or laws and these sorts of things. But it seems to me beyond what specifically is taught, one thing that I think would be useful in terms of like the focus of how schooling is done is a skills-based approach, right? Especially
Yes.
at older ages when people are able to develop more advanced skills. But in my, you know, kind of ideal world of how schooling would be done at earlier ages, the emphasis on play would develop into an emphasis on skills, right? And taking that would, I mean, there's a few challenges involved, but one of them would be the perception issue, right? That there's a wide scale perception that play is frivolous, right? There's just it's just a form of fun, but there's so much, especially with younger children, there's so much incidental learning that goes on, everything from just how to use their hands, go from gross motor to fine motor skills, and all these different social learning that happen, right? How to play nice, how to take losses,
Absolutely.
how to scrape your knee and get past it, right? I mean, there's so much that goes along with play at younger ages that I wish would translate into a more mature version of it at the skills level, whether it be through vocational schools or different forms of beyond the classroom learning to develop kids and young adults, teenagers, abilities to learn that they themselves can choose what they do in a way that they can improve
Absolutely.
at it. I think that would be a good thing.
And I think you're actually talking about, it's funny because they like to call, well, there are people that say one of Oklahoma's best kept secrets, but it's no longer a secret, is career tech. And no, you're absolutely right with those fine and gross motor skills eventually translating to, once you're older, to be able to learn a skill set. And so I know Oklahoma City Public Schools, we are so proud of the strong relationship we have built with Metro Tech. And I actually got to go to Metro Tech in high school, and it's pretty unique in that, you do get to like show off and learn different skills, and they'll grade you based off of those skills. I mean, I started the Surge Tech program last semester, and a lot of the like how they grade you is how you perform, and how you do those physical skills. And so I think that we need to increase just how many students can go to Metro Tech and have these opportunities. I know another thing that you reminded me of is whenever I did work with the autistic children, I worked at Behavioral Innovations as a registered behavioral technician. A lot of times I was their only school opportunity. I was teaching them those incidentals and how to behave correctly, why certain behaviors are not acceptable, how to share, how to maybe tie your shoe, things that aren't necessarily being taught in schools. And maybe we need more of that. We do need more of that. I know that they were recently trying to hire it's called a board certified behavioral analyst, BCBA, okay? And those people, they make plans for special needs children. So I had BCBA's, board certified behavioral analysts who were creating these plans, and then a registered behavioral technician would implement the plans for autistic children, okay? And depending on what their level was, and I know that they were trying to hire one for the entire district,
Wow.
which is over 33,000 students, maybe more like 35 if you're trying to count the charter school kids. One. And then I think the number of counselors and psychologists are also very low in OKCPS for how big of a district we are. And why is that? We can hire more people. Why not? And it's been tough to even fill that one position because the pay is so low compared to a place like Behavioral Innovations, where they are teaching students these like skills that aren't necessarily being taught in schools. And so, it did bring up this interesting topic that I like. We need to advocate more for our social workers, our psychiatrists, psychologists, our board certified behavioral analysts, maybe even having registered behavioral technicians that can help our students with these skills. I don't know if you knew that, but that's something that I've been looking at with a pretty critical eye and wondering, well, why are we like this? There's research that shows, if you have more school psychologists, school counselors, the success goes up immensely because you're listening to the students, you're able to do something about the problems that they have. And having these adults that are able to take care of our students and their mental health. It's an important topic, even when it comes to learning these skills.
Sure. So another challenge we've kind of alluded to a bit here is the struggle with paying teachers, with maintaining teachers. If somebody's new to this topic, how would you describe the problem so far? What would you be interested in doing to help the problem?
Yes. So OKCPS, I do know that what has happened a little bit more recently is I know that the ESSER funds are running out, which are the funds that came from COVID happening. And so because these funds have run out, the contracts have ended for several teachers. And so there are teachers that, they just haven't been reinstated. So their contracts haven't been signed again. Sometimes that position is no longer available. And so I've been actually hearing that district-wide, there's a few people that have lost their jobs. But it wasn't also new information. This was old information. However, people have been feeling that, we're losing these teachers. There are some teachers that are leaving the district, maybe because they are being overworked and maybe underpaid. It just kind of depends on each person, right? I originally thought, I'm like, well, this is kind of a recipe for collapse. If our teachers are leaving naturally, and then there are some that are leaving because their contracts are ended, and it's putting more work onto the teachers that are still there, who's going to want to stay there with that? And so I know one way that we are trying to battle this is through the teacher pipeline, and it's a program that we are extraordinarily proud of. So the teacher pipeline, once you graduate from OKCPS, if you get accepted, your college is completely paid for. You can become a teacher and you can work for the district at the same time as you're going to school, and then eventually become a teacher for the district. And it's been quite a lovely program. Like, we need more of that. And so I know to try to battle it, I know we try to keep our wages as competitive as possible, but another criticism that we have is we're kind of top heavy, like superintendent earns a 6-figure salary, and then all the other superintendents also have pretty much a 6-figure salary. But then once you get down to the teacher level, it's, it's not as great. And so I do know that we are trying as much as we can to keep our salaries as competitive as we can. But sometimes it's also just the way that the system was built. Why is it that our superintendent and these people earn 6-figure salaries, but our teachers do not, and they're doing the grunt work?
Sure.
So I personally think they do need to be paid more because they're fueling our future. They're doing a thankless job every single day. And that's also one of the reasons why I ran for office and ran for the specific office that's not paid is, it's a thankless job and somebody needs to be thanked for it. So I will be fighting for that, and also for having smaller class sizes, but there's also a research in that as well, that if you have too small, it's also not as productive, but if you have too large, it's not as productive. So there's a perfect range where class sizes should be according to the research.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Does that research say what the range of the number is?
Yes. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but I think it's after around 30, it's not productive, and if it's like less than, I think, like 15 or so, it's also not as productive. I'm not really sure why it's like that, but yeah, there's actually a perfect range. But you know, right now, and I didn't really tell anybody this, but I actually was working at Mount St. Mary. It's a private school, but they needed a science teacher. They had a science teacher that left in the middle of the semester. So a week before my election, I decided to do this job, temporary job. And you know, I have 57 students. I teach 3 different classes, and my larger classes, they do get a little bit chaotic. And so I think personally, as a teacher, having a bigger class size, it's a lot to handle. It is, and I can feel it within having a class that's over maybe like 25, and then one that's like 15 or 20 or whatever. You can feel it. The work is difficult with more students. It's just, you have to keep the classroom calmer. And so I think it's all about fighting for those teachers and fighting to have good working conditions, right? Kind of like with the teachers union, what they always advocate about. And so we have to always think about them, and sometimes it's not being done at the top.
Right. And so I personally do have some experience now. I've been working as a part-time substitute teacher in middle school. Yep. And one of the things that's unfortunate to me is it seems like there needs to be much more in the way of funding for support staff, right? People that can do my job, which is basically a babysitter, right? So that the teachers don't have to do that as much, you know, where it comes to like, you know, monitoring recess or dismissal or these things, right? People who, in the case of teachers whose job it is to teach, right, having to do all this classroom management, you know, moderating behavior and these things. It seems to me that if you had more support staff taking on that role, that could really dramatically improve the educational process.
Absolutely. And you know, that's reminding me of how many counselors we have. That's their part of the support staff. The lunch lady, right, and those substitute teachers. We need to have more of those support staff, and we need to pay them as well, like good as well. Because yeah, like you said, I mean, are you a glorified babysitter? No, we don't want that. Of course not. It needs to be a place of learning. And it has to be a place of learning. It's a school. It's a school district. And so I know that was one of my biggest things on my platform, is I'd like to help recruit and retain our support staff and teachers. The support staff, I mean, they're doing the same thankless job every day as well. I mean, they're helping to create and foster this environment of learning, and everybody should consider how, like, putting more pressure on the board and putting more pressure at the state level. Like, hey, we need more support staff. These are our kids. You know, it's the public's interest. And so, yeah, I'd love to challenge everybody here to put that pressure on us, because I think we definitely need it.
Sure. And it's made more difficult when at the state level in particular, whether it be in the case of Superintendent Ryan Walters, who's often, it seems that he's more motivated by, you know, getting a national platform, speaking
Absolutely.
in terms of what his political beliefs are, rather than supporting teachers. I mean, that's another layer beyond the financial difficulties we've talked about so far, the kind of the emotional, this idea that that teachers can reasonably feel that they're not being supported by the state government is another challenge on top of all the issues we've already talked about.
And you know, something that I actually learned, and I don't remember which number we are, but we're really, really low on per pupil funding in the state of Oklahoma. And so I think we're like 48th, one of the last, right?
Sure.
And so the per pupil funding in Oklahoma has been low. And what's interesting, though, is if your state funding per pupil is low, so is your federal funding. But if you increase that, you increase the federal funding.
Wow.
Yes.
Interesting.
And so at a state level, maybe I'm going to tell Representative Alonzo, I think I have. I've told a couple people about it, is if we increase that per pupil funding, okay, the federal dollars are going to come in. That means we can pay our teachers more, a more competitive salary. We can pay our support staff more. And then our students that might have, like, if they qualify for free or reduced lunch, or if they have some other qualification that also brings in more federal dollars, they're also being underserved. It's kind of like a double whammy right now. Like, our students are already poor. Some of them have these extra stipulations. and we're just not providing what we could. And so, no, that tension, it's statewide and it's also federal wide. I mean, we can do this, but it has to be all of us, at the state level, at the board level, and then federally. That money's just going to come in. And so I wish more people would know that.
Right, yeah. I didn't know that. That's pretty remarkable. But by way of wrapping up here, are there any things in particular that give you hope for the future of Oklahoma City schools?
Absolutely. So this past week, and the week before, I mean, we had OKCPS high school graduations. So I didn't really realize this until recently, but I do have a high school in my district. It's the alternative high school. It's Emerson North Alternative School. So they're kind of on the down low, because whenever you go to the website, you don't always see their name listed under me, and then sometimes you do. So I have a high school. It's one of the alternatives, but I got to see them graduate. And so this week, I mean, it's been full of just celebrations of these students and their achievements. We've seen a lot of athletes that have gotten really big scholarships. We've seen students that they're maybe the first, they've gotten the first kind of scholarship at their school. I think it was at Douglas, they had their first golf scholarship. And so that was a really cool thing to be a part of. Hearing the valedictorian speeches, just seeing just how much we've all poured into it, because our product is these graduates, our high school graduates. That's the product of OKCPS. So I've been extraordinarily just excited this week. I've gotten to slow down just a little bit and just see their successes, see that they're growing, and I consider them all my kids now. All 35,000, whatever the exact number is. Yes. And then I know one of the biggest things for me and throughout my campaign was actually my volunteers. You're one of them. And I had students come out. There were some students that were from OKCPS too that would come out that I knew personally. And you guys were literally one of my biggest motivations to go as hard as I did in the campaign. If it wasn't for my volunteers, if it wasn't for my constituents, of course, that sometimes would tell me some of the issues that are going on at the local schools or in the neighborhoods with their kids, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be as aware as I am today of everything that's going on. But yeah, seeing those successes and, seeing that, I mean, there are people that really care. Another big weight that was lifted off my shoulder was finding our superintendent. I know that she is somebody that really cares. I mean, she was reaching out to me. She was ready before we even asked her to be the superintendent, like 3 weeks before she got hired. She was ready. And so I know she was somebody that not only was data driven, but she was also very compassionate. I know she cares about everybody in the district. She reached out to me and board member Juan Lacona about House Bill 4156 when it came out, and expressed her solidarity. That was a big moment. And I'm like, okay, so we have somebody that is thinking about the Hispanic and Latino kids, that this is where it needs to go. And so I think probably the biggest thing that I'm hopeful for is that there's a lot of change happening in OKCPS, and I'm so happy to be a part of it, so happy to be in the places that I am, so I can bring my Hispanic heritage background to the table, and also my experiences at Emory as an engineer, and going to career tech, going to OKCPS authorized schools and public schools. I mean, I think it's a pretty cool blend of an experience that I can bring to the table that is fresh and exciting. So, yeah, thank you for that question.
Of course, very nice. Anything else by way of wrapping up you'd like to mention?
What do you have anything?
Not in particular.
I guess I'd like to maybe just thank some people. Thank you to the Oklahoma Legislative Latino Caucus members, Senator Michael Brooks Jimenez, Representative Annie Menz, Representative Alonzo, for this incredible opportunity to serve the public. I mean, I honestly did not envision it actually happening, and to be in the spaces I am now, it's a beautiful and remarkable path that I've taken. It's something that I'm so grateful for every single day. And thank you to everybody who's ever supported the campaign and it will support the campaign. It's hard being a candidate. That is something that I I don't know. It was such a arduous journey almost to be a candidate. You have to put yourself out there. You have to ask people for their time, ask people for their money, ask people to endorse you, to believe in you, and you have to put your entire life out there. It's not an easy path. And so my heart is definitely out there to current candidates, especially those that have been candidates for months, like maybe almost a year, maybe, I don't know, because it happens. It's a really tough journey. And so to be able to have just this great support system around me, Ms. Jessica Martinez Brooks was also a huge important mentor in my life and still is. And I'm just so grateful for these people. I'm grateful for you for doing this and, having these political discourses. I mean, we need it. We need to talk more about politics. We need to have more people go out and vote, register to vote, volunteer, maybe donate if they can. It's kind of this cycle of trying to get more and more people involved and in the political process and being civically engaged. And one of the most special things that I was able to do was get some people that were never civically engaged to start being engaged and to care about this, because it affects our lives so much. It really does in so many ways. And one of the last things I really wanted to tell everybody also is kind of something that we've been saying since the beginning. Like when you think of power in government, you think of the president, you think of the governor, you think of vice president, you think of those people. But what really happens is, and people don't vote in these local elections, it's these lower school board, maybe councilmen, councilwomen elections, because they are closer to the people. They spread the money where it needs to go. And so it's impacting people more closely, but people don't come out and vote for these local elections. So it's super important to be a part of, go out and vote at your local school board, your local councilmen or women. And then of course, always do all of them. I mean, you should vote in all of them if you can. But yes, so just thank you to everybody who was involved in this process and is still involved. And thank you to you for being a huge volunteer and for having this podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Jessica Cifuentes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.